Hello everyone and welcome back to Haunted Hues. I know many of you tune in to these videos as you drift off to sleep, finding comfort in the stories we share. To make our community even more connected, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now let's dive in. It was a quiet night on August 3rd, 2023. Around 2:15 a.m., I was lying in bed, wrapped up in my blankets, listening to the soft rain tapping against the window. The world outside felt peaceful, and I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. Faint footsteps coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I mean, who wouldn't in the dead of night? But as I listened more closely, the sound became clearer. It wasn't my cat, Oliver, because he was fast asleep on the couch in the living room. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, and I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I took a deep breath and decided to check it out. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded quietly into the hallway. The dim light from the nightstand barely illuminated the space, and every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the stillness. I flicked on the hallway light, and just like that, the footsteps stopped. I stood there for a moment, peering into the darkness, half expecting to see someone lurking just out of sight. But nothing, just silence. I felt a mix of relief and confusion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I decided to check each room in the house, just to be sure. I opened the bathroom door, peered into the kitchen, and even checked the guest room. Everything was as it should be, no signs of a break-in or anything out of the ordinary. But that uneasy feeling lingered. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. After my little investigation, I returned to my room, hoping that whatever had caused the footsteps was just a figment of my imagination. I crawled back under the covers, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. But just as I was starting to drift off again, I heard it. The footsteps were back, this time right outside my bedroom door. My heart raced. I froze, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. I wanted to call out, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. Instead, I lay there wide awake, listening intently. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Finally, I mustered the courage to call out, "Hello!" My voice sounded small and shaky in the stillness of the night. No response, just silence. The footsteps stopped, and I felt a strange mix of relief and dread wash over me. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination again. But deep down, I knew something was off. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved to see the sunlight streaming through my window. I decided to go out and talk to my neighbors, hoping they might have heard something weird too. I knocked on a few doors and everyone seemed just as clueless as I was. They hadn't heard any footsteps or anything unusual during the night. Feeling a bit defeated, I returned home, wanting answers but left with more questions. What had I heard? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange had happened, and it left me feeling uneasy. Now, a few weeks later, I still think about that night. It's unsettling to consider what could have been making those sounds. I've become a bit more cautious about being home alone at night. I keep the lights on, and I always check the locks before I settle in for the night. I've even thought about getting a security system. Better safe than sorry, right? But part of me is still curious about what happened that night. Was it just a figment of my imagination? Or was there something else lurking in the shadows? I guess I'll never really know. But every time I hear a creak or a thud in the house now, I can't help but feel a little jumpy. It's funny how one strange night can change the way you look at your home. I used to think of my house as a safe haven, but now it feels a little different. Life goes on, and I try to push those thoughts to the back of my mind. But every now and then, when the rain starts to fall, I find myself glancing at the hallway, half expecting to hear those phantom footsteps again. It's a strange feeling, knowing that something unexplainable happened, and it's stuck with me. So, if you ever find yourself home alone on a rainy night, just remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't see or explain. And who knows, maybe you'll hear some phantom footsteps too. Just try not to freak out like I did. It was a busy morning, and I was rushing around my apartment, trying to get ready for work. I had a big meeting that day, and I couldn't afford to be late. I was in a hurry, so I didn't pay much attention to where I was putting things. I was running around, throwing on my clothes, brushing my teeth, and trying to find my favorite mug for my morning coffee. As I was about to leave, I realized I couldn't find my keys. I searched everywhere, but they were nowhere to be found. I retraced my steps, trying to remember the last place I had seen them. Did I leave them in the door? No, that couldn't be it. I always double-check to make sure it's locked. Did I put them in my pocket? I patted myself down, but they weren't there either. I started to panic, wondering how I was going to get to work without them. I spent the next hour tearing my apartment apart, looking for those keys. I checked every drawer, every nook and cranny, but they were gone. I even looked in the fridge, thinking maybe I had absent-mindedly put them in there or something. But nope, just a bunch of leftovers and half-empty takeout containers. I was starting to lose my mind. I could feel the stress building up inside me, and I knew I was going to be late for my meeting. Just as I was about to give up and call a locksmith, I noticed something strange. My keys were sitting on the kitchen counter, right where I always put them. I stared at them in disbelief, knowing that I had already checked there multiple times. I even remember thinking to myself, if only they were right here, that would be too easy. But there they were, plain as day, twinkling in the morning light. I grabbed the keys and rushed out the door, still trying to figure out what had happened. Had I been so distracted that I had missed them, or was there something else at play? I mean, I know I can be a bit scatterbrained sometimes, but this was just ridiculous. I replayed the morning in my head, trying to pinpoint the moment when I had seen them last. But it was all a blur. As I was driving to work, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. It was just so strange that they had disappeared and then reappeared like that. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see them floating behind me or something. I know I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When I got to the office, I told my coworkers about what had happened. They all laughed and said I was just being forgetful. It happens to the best of us, they said. But I couldn't help but feel like they were missing the point. It wasn't just about misplacing my keys. It was about the way they had vanished and then reappeared like magic. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about it. I even started to wonder if I was going crazy. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew that wasn't true. I had searched for those keys for an hour, for crying out loud. I had torn my apartment apart, piece by piece. There was no way I could have missed them. When I got home that evening, I decided to investigate further. I went straight to the kitchen counter and examined the area where I had found the keys. I looked for any signs of disturbance, any clues that might explain what had happened, but everything seemed normal. The counter was clean, the keys were in their usual spot, and there was no evidence of any kind of supernatural activity. I sighed in frustration and decided to let it go. I mean, what was the point of dwelling on it? The keys were back, and that's all that mattered. I went about my evening routine, making dinner and watching some TV. But I couldn't help but glance at the keys every now and then, as if they were going to disappear again. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the day. I went to the kitchen to make my coffee, and that's when I noticed it. My keys were gone. Again, I felt my heart sink as I searched the counter, hoping that I was just seeing things. But they were nowhere to be found. I spent the next hour retracing my steps, just like the day before. I searched every inch of my apartment, but the keys were nowhere to be seen. I was starting to feel like I was in some kind of twisted game, and I was the only one playing. Just as I was about to give up and call a locksmith again, I heard a strange noise coming from the living room. It was a faint jingling sound, like the sound of keys. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly made my way towards the sound, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. And that's when I saw them. My keys were floating in midair, just a few feet off the ground. I stared at them in disbelief, my mouth hanging open. I reached out to touch them, but they darted away as if they were alive. I stood there, frozen in place, watching as my keys floated around the room. They seemed to be dancing, twirling, and spinning in the air. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something out of a sci-fi movie. As I watched, I noticed that the keys were glowing faintly. It was a soft, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from them. I reached out again, and this time they didn't move away. I gently grabbed them, and as soon as I did, the light faded. I stared at the keys in my hand, my mind racing. What the heck was going on? Was I dreaming? I pinched myself, but I was wide awake. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, and that's when I noticed something else. On the floor, where the keys had been floating, there was a small, glowing circle. It was about the size of a quarter, and it seemed to be pulsing with energy. I knelt down to get a closer look, and as I did, the circle expanded, growing larger and larger. I scrambled backwards, my heart racing. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew it couldn't be good. I watched in horror as the circle continued to grow, filling the room with a strange, otherworldly light. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the circle vanished. The room went dark, and the only sound was the pounding of my heart. I sat there, shaking, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I gathered the courage to stand up. I checked the room, but everything seemed normal. The keys were still in my hand, and there was no sign of the glowing circle. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process what had happened. I called in sick to work, unable to focus on anything but the strange events of the morning. I replayed it over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it all. As the day wore on, I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overtired and stressed out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen those keys floating in midair, and I had seen that strange, glowing circle on the floor. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly checking my keys to make sure they were still there. I avoided the living room, afraid that the circle might reappear. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The keys stayed put, and the circle never reappeared. I started to relax, thinking that maybe it was all over. But a part of me knew better. I knew that whatever had happened, it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. To this day, I still don't know what happened to my keys that day. I've searched for answers, but there's nothing out there that can explain it. All I know is that it was the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and it's changed the way I look at the world. If you've ever had something similar happen to you, I'd love to hear about it. Share your stories in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary things can turn into the most extraordinary mysteries. It was a quiet night in my cozy apartment. I had just finished a delicious dinner of mac and cheese, my favorite comfort food. As I cleaned up the dishes, I glanced out the window at the dark sky. The stars twinkled like little diamonds, and the moon cast a soft glow over the city below. I smiled to myself, feeling grateful for my little slice of peace in the bustling world. After putting everything away, I settled into my favorite spot on the couch, wrapping myself in my favorite fuzzy blanket. I grabbed the remote and started flipping through the channels, looking for something good to watch. I finally landed on a classic horror movie, perfect for a spooky night alone. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the TV to light up the room. The popcorn was ready, and I was all set for a night of thrills and chills. As the movie played, I got lost in the story, completely absorbed in the characters and their adventures. But then, something shifted. A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt uneasy. I looked around, trying to shake off the feeling, but everything seemed normal. The curtains were still, and the only light came from the flickering screen. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I was just tired from a long day at work. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe my imagination playing tricks on me. I mean, who doesn't hear random noises in their home from time to time? But then it came again, a little louder this time. My heart began to race. I turned down the volume on the TV, straining to listen. The whispers seemed to be calling my name, beckoning me to come closer. Is someone there? I called out, my voice shaky. Silence. Just my own voice echoing back at me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my mind wandering. But then, I saw it. A shadowy figure dart across the hallway. My heart dropped. I blinked, thinking maybe I was just seeing things. But no, it was definitely there. I stared at the empty space, wondering if I had really seen something or if I was just losing my mind. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out the sound of my name being called. Hey, come here. It was soft and almost melodic, but it sent shivers down my spine. I froze, terrified to move. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms started to sweat. The shadows seemed to dance around me, flickering in and out of view. I felt a presence in the room, even though I was completely alone. It was as if the darkness itself had come alive, taunting me with its eerie whispers. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was just a prank, or perhaps my friends were playing tricks on me. But then I remembered, no one knew I was home alone that night. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe I could call someone, but my hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold it. The whispers continued, swirling around me like a ghostly breeze. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone, who could help me make sense of what was happening. "Come play with me." It was a child's voice, sweet yet eerie. I froze, my finger hovering over the call button. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what was going on. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and slowly made my way toward the hallway. Each step felt like a mile, and I was convinced that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to come closer. As I reached the hallway, the whispers intensified. They were all around me now, echoing off the walls. "Come here. Don't be scared." I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and I shivered. I mustered the courage to turn on the lights, praying that whatever was haunting me would disappear. The switch clicked, and the room flooded with light. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. Suddenly, everything went silent. The whispers stopped, and the shadows vanished. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to convince myself that it was over. But even in the bright light, I felt a lingering unease. I glanced around the hallway, half expecting to see something lurking in the corners, but there was nothing, just my empty apartment. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just tired, or perhaps the movie had gotten to me. I went back to the couch, turning up the volume on the TV, hoping to distract myself. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. It was like the shadows had left a piece of themselves behind, and I could still feel their presence in the room. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to linger in the air. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. I tried to focus on the movie, but every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the curtains made me jump. I was hyper-aware of every sound, convinced that the whispers would return at any moment. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again. I even considered calling the police, but I didn't want to sound like a crazy person. Eventually, the night dragged on, and I finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from the adrenaline and fear. I woke up the next morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, and everything felt normal again. I convinced myself that it had all been a bad dream, but deep down, I knew what I had experienced was real. I could still hear the echoes of those eerie whispers in my mind, haunting me like a ghost that refused to let go. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. I know what I saw and heard, but it defies logic. Was it just my imagination, a trick of the mind, or was there something more sinister at play? I still get chills thinking about it, and I often find myself glancing at the hallway, half expecting to hear those whispers again. Sometimes, I wonder if I should have investigated further, but the fear of what I might find keeps me from venturing down that dark path. If you ever experience something similar, trust your instincts. It's easy to brush off strange occurrences as nothing, but sometimes it's best to confront the unknown. I learned that night that there are things in this world that we can't explain, and sometimes it's better to be cautious. So, if you've ever felt like you were being watched in your own home, don't ignore that feeling. Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your own creepy experiences. And who knows, maybe we're not as alone as we think we are. It was a sunny afternoon when I decided to explore the dusty attic of my family's old farmhouse. I had always been curious about what was hidden in that dark, forgotten space. The house was old, filled with creaky floors and the smell of wood. My family had lived there for generations, and the attic was like a treasure chest of memories. I climbed the rickety stairs, feeling excited and a little nervous. The attic was dimly lit, with only a small window letting in some light. Dust floated in the air, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. I saw old boxes piled high, some covered with sheets, just waiting to be discovered. I took a deep breath and started to dig through the boxes, pulling out old clothes, toys, and forgotten things. Each item had a story, and I felt like I was stepping back in time. After searching through a few boxes, I found something that caught my eye. It was a beautifully carved music box, sitting on top of a stack of old books. The design was intricate, with flowers and swirls etched into the wood. It was covered in dust, but I could tell it was special. I brushed off the dirt and opened the lid, expecting to hear a sweet melody. Instead of a gentle tune, a haunting, distorted sound filled the air. It was like a music box playing at the wrong speed, and it sent chills down my spine. I dropped the box in shock, and it clattered to the floor, but the music kept playing. My heart raced as I stared at it, unsure of what to do. I thought maybe I imagined it, but the eerie melody echoed in my ears. I backed away slowly, feeling like I needed to get out of there. But just as I turned to leave, something strange happened. The music box began to move on its own, spinning and twisting as the eerie melody echoed through the attic. I watched in horror as the lid opened and closed, as if a ghostly hand was controlling it. Panic washed over me. What was happening? Was I dreaming? I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding. I slammed the attic door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The music stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. I stood there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. I felt like I had just escaped something that wanted to keep me there. After a few minutes, I finally found the courage to peek back into the attic. I slowly opened the door, half expecting to see the music box still playing. But it was gone. The space where it had been was empty, and the only sound was the creaking of the old house. I felt relieved but confused. Where had the music box gone? I didn't go back up into the attic that day. In fact, I avoided it for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the music box had somehow left a mark on me. Every time I walked past the attic door, I felt a chill run down my spine. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to forget about the incident. But the memory of that haunting melody lingered in my mind. I wondered what dark secrets that old farmhouse held. My family had lived there for so long, and there were stories about the house being haunted, but I had always brushed them off. Now, I wasn't so sure. One evening, I decided to do some research. I pulled out my laptop and looked up the history of the farmhouse. I found old articles that mentioned strange occurrences in the house over the years. People had reported hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and feeling cold spots. My heart raced as I read each story, realizing I wasn't the only one who had experienced something strange. As I dug deeper, I found a mention of a music box that belonged to a little girl who lived in the house many years ago. She had loved to play with her music box, but after she passed away, it was said to have become haunted. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was the music box I found connected to this little girl? I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. I wanted to know more, but I was also scared of what I might find. I decided to talk to my family about it. My grandmother had lived in the house longer than anyone else, and I thought she might have some insight. When I asked her about the music box, her face went pale. "Oh, that old thing," she said, her voice trembling. "It's been in the family for generations. I thought it was lost." She paused. "I always told your father to stay away from it. There's something about that box. It's not just a toy. Her words sent chills down my spine. I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head, refusing to explain. I could tell she was scared, and that only made me more curious. I had to know what was going on with that music box. A few days later, I decided to face my fears. I gathered my courage and headed back up to the attic. As I climbed the stairs, my heart raced. I felt like I was walking into a horror movie, but I was determined to find out the truth. When I reached the top, I took a deep breath and opened the attic door. The space was just as I had left it, filled with dust and cobwebs. I scanned the room, looking for any sign of the music box. My eyes landed on a pile of boxes in the corner, and I felt a strange pull towards them. I walked over and started digging through the boxes, my hands shaking. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a soft melody playing in the background. My heart dropped as I realized it was the same haunting tune from before. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The music seemed to be coming from behind one of the boxes. I hesitated for a moment, feeling scared, but curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly moved the boxes aside. There it was, the music box, sitting there as if it had been waiting for me. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The intricate carvings were just as beautiful as I remembered. I brushed off the dust and opened the lid, half expecting the eerie melody to start playing again. But this time it was different. Instead of the distorted sound, a sweet, gentle tune filled the air. It was beautiful, almost like a lullaby. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me, and for a moment, I was lost in the music. It felt like the music box was trying to tell me something, to share a story that had been buried for too long. As I listened, I felt a presence in the room. It was warm and comforting, like a gentle hug. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. I could almost see the little girl who had once owned the music box, dancing and twirling in the light. I realized then that she wasn't trying to scare me. She just wanted to be remembered. But just as quickly as the warmth came, it vanished. The music abruptly stopped, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the attic. I opened my eyes, startled, and looked around. The room felt different, darker somehow. I quickly closed the lid of the music box and set it down, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard a soft voice whispering my name. "Stay, please." It was the same child's voice from before, and it sent chills down my spine. I hesitated, torn between fear and the urge to help. I glanced back at the music box, and for a moment, I felt a connection to the little girl. But I couldn't stay. I slammed the attic door behind me, my heart pounding. I ran down the stairs, not stopping until I was safely back in the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to catch my breath. The music box was still up there, and I knew I couldn't go back for it. Not now, not after what I had experienced. The days passed, and I tried to forget about the music box, but it haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something important behind. I decided to talk to my grandmother again, hoping she could help me make sense of everything. When I brought up the music box, her expression softened. "It's a part of our family's history," she said, "but it's also a reminder of loss. The little girl loved that box, and after she passed away, it became a vessel for her spirit. Some say it's haunted, but I believe it holds her memories." Her words resonated with me. I realized that the music box wasn't just an object. It was a connection to the past, a way for the little girl to reach out from beyond. I felt a mix of sadness and understanding. I couldn't just leave it up there, forgotten and alone. That weekend, I gathered my courage once more and headed back to the attic. This time, I was determined to bring the music box down. I climbed the stairs, my heart racing, but I felt a sense of purpose. When I opened the attic door, I was greeted by the familiar sight of dust and shadows. I walked over to the corner where I had found the music box. It was still there, just as I had left it. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hands. As I opened the lid, the gentle melody began to play again, filling the attic with warmth. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, and I felt a sense of peace. I decided to take the music box downstairs and keep it in my room. I wanted to honor the little girl's memory, to remember her and the joy she had found in the music. I placed it on my dresser, where I could see it every day. To this day, I wonder what dark secrets that old farmhouse held. The music box became a cherished part of my life, a reminder of the past and the little girl who loved it. If you ever come across a haunted music box, my advice is to leave it alone and let the past stay buried. But if you feel a connection, don't be afraid to explore it. Sometimes, the things we fear the most can lead us to unexpected discoveries. Share your own spooky stories in the comments. I'd love to hear what you've experienced. And remember, you never know what mysteries might be hiding in the shadows. Have you ever had one of those nights where you just feel like you're not alone, even when you are? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me, and let me tell you, it's a story that still gives me the creeps. So, grab a snack and settle in because this is one wild ride. It was one of those rainy nights, you know, the kind where the raindrops tap against the window like they're trying to get your attention. I was in my tiny apartment, just me and my thoughts. I had just finished dinner, which was a sad microwave meal, and was getting ready for bed. My apartment was all cozy and warm, but outside, the wind howled like a pack of wolves. It was the perfect night for a horror movie, but instead, I was just scrolling through my phone, trying to find something to watch. As I was about to turn off the lights and crawl under the covers, I heard it, a strange sound coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was something else, something closer. I froze, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it again. Footsteps. Someone was walking down the hallway, and my stomach dropped. I mean, I was home alone. Who the heck could it be? The footsteps were faint at first, like someone was trying to sneak up on me. But then they grew louder, echoing in the stillness of my apartment. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was terrified, but I knew I had to do something. So I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. Yeah, I know, not exactly a weapon of choice, but it was the best I had. I held it tightly, feeling the cool metal against my palm, and slowly made my way towards the hallway, my heart pounding like a drum. Each step I took felt like a scene from a horror movie. The footsteps had stopped just outside my bedroom door, and I could barely breathe. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and flung the door open, ready to confront whatever was lurking there. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty, and the footsteps had vanished into thin air. I felt a chill run down my spine. I checked every room in my apartment, even the closet where I kept my winter jackets. Nothing. It was completely deserted. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I imagined it? Was I just being paranoid? But deep down, I knew what I heard. I could still feel the weight of those footsteps, like they were pressing down on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I flipped on every light in the apartment, illuminating every corner, but it didn't help. I was still on edge, every little sound making me jump. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, clutching that baseball bat like it was a lifeline. I sat on the couch, staring at the hallway, waiting for the footsteps to return. My mind was racing with all sorts of thoughts. Was it an intruder? A ghost? Or was I just losing it? As the hours dragged on, I felt like I was in a twisted version of a waiting game. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, just when I thought I could relax, I heard it again. This time, it was softer, almost like a whisper of footsteps, just enough to send chills down my spine. My heart raced as I stood up, bat in hand, and slowly walked towards the sound. I felt like I was in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I got to my bedroom door and paused. Should I open it again? What if something was waiting for me? But I had to know. I took a deep breath, flung the door open once more, and nothing. Just like before, the hallway was empty. I felt a mix of relief and dread wash over me. I checked the windows to make sure they were locked, checked the front door, and even peeked under the bed. Nothing. I spent the rest of the night in a state of hyper-awareness. I turned on the TV, hoping that the noise would drown out my racing thoughts. I flipped through channels, but nothing could distract me from the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing towards the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there, just out of sight. When morning finally came, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept a wink, and the sunlight streaming through the windows felt like a blessing. I searched the apartment again, hoping to find some logical explanation for what had happened. Maybe it was just the building settling? Maybe I had imagined the whole thing? But there was no sign of an intruder. No doors left ajar, no windows open. Everything was just as I had left it. I felt a mix of confusion and frustration. I knew what I heard, but I couldn't explain it. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. It's one of those things that just doesn't make sense. And it haunts me. I still live in that apartment, and every now and then, I'll hear a sound that makes me freeze. But I've learned to trust my instincts. If you ever experience something similar, don't brush it off. Sometimes the unknown is scarier than we think, but facing it is part of being human. So, if you've got your own spooky stories, share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you've experienced. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't explain. It was a quiet evening in late autumn. The sky outside was a deep indigo, and the only sounds in my apartment were the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The warmth of the apartment was a stark contrast to the chill that had settled outside. I had just finished a modest dinner, a simple turkey and cheese sandwich, and had settled onto my worn-out couch with the intention of catching up on some television. The glow from the lamp cast a soft, reassuring light across the room, creating a cozy atmosphere that I usually found comforting. As I flipped through the channels, searching for something engaging to watch, my gaze wandered around the room. My eyes landed on an old painting that hung on the wall opposite the couch. I had acquired it years ago from a thrift store, and it had always seemed like a mere decorative piece. A generic landscape with rolling hills, a winding river, and a solitary figure in the distance. The painting was one of those typical finds that didn't evoke much emotion or curiosity. It was merely background scenery in my everyday life. That evening, however, the painting seemed to draw me in. The colors, which had once seemed muted and unremarkable, now appeared unusually vivid. The light from the lamp illuminated the canvas in a way that made the scene almost seem to shimmer. The rolling hills and the meandering river, which had previously blended into a bland backdrop, now held a depth and texture that I hadn't noticed before. The figure in the distance, which had always appeared as a mere speck, now seemed to possess a strange presence. The more I looked, the more I noticed subtle changes in the painting. The figure, which had always seemed distant and static, appeared to be moving. At first, it was a slight shift, a change in the angle of the figure's posture. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light or a result of my fatigue. But when I looked again, the movement was more pronounced. The figure's shape seemed to waver and shift as if it was struggling to break free from the constraints of the canvas. A chill ran down my spine. The painting, which had always been a benign element of my decor, now seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The figure's movements grew more erratic, its form becoming less distinct and more fluid. It was as if the figure was trying to reach out beyond the boundaries of the painting, its limbs stretching and twisting in an unsettling manner. I felt an increasing sense of dread. The room around me seemed to change. The shadows on the walls stretched and distorted, growing darker and more menacing. The comforting warmth of the lamp seemed to be swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Strange, indistinct whispers began to emanate from the direction of the painting. The whispers were not clear enough to discern words, but their tone was urgent and insistent. It was as though the painting was trying to communicate something profound and disquieting. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. I tried to move, to escape the mounting sense of horror, but my body felt as though it was rooted to the spot. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The painting's influence seemed to be growing stronger, enveloping me in a sense of impending doom. The whispers grew louder, their urgency increasing. The figure in the painting moved with increasing desperation, its eyes, though still tiny and distant, seeming to lock onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I could no longer distinguish between reality and the nightmarish vision before me. My thoughts became disjointed, and my perception of time warped. I felt as though I was slipping into a realm beyond the familiar, drawn into the disturbing world of the painting. Just when I thought I could bear it no longer, the figure's movement abruptly ceased. The room's shadows retreated, and the whispers faded into silence. The painting's colors dimmed, and the unsettling energy seemed to dissipate. I blinked, trying to make sense of the sudden shift. The warmth of the lamp returned, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, but the sense of unease lingered. The painting now appeared different. The vibrant colors had become dull and muted, and the brushstrokes looked rough and uneven. The figure, once so animated and unsettling, was now motionless, its gaze fixed on an indistinct point in the distance. The tranquility of the scene had returned, but it felt hollow and disconcerting. I shook my head, struggling to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination or a result of exhaustion. The painting, though now seemingly benign, left me with a profound sense of discomfort. I tried to rationalize the experience, attributing it to fatigue or the play of light and shadows. Yet, deep down, I knew something inexplicable had occurred. The painting, once a simple decoration, had become a source of lingering unease. In the days that followed, I found it difficult to look at the painting without a shiver of apprehension. It remained in my apartment, a silent reminder of that unsettling night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and mysterious still lingered within its frame. Despite its appearance of normalcy, I remained wary of its presence, haunted by the memory of its eerie, otherworldly allure. It was a quiet night, and I was alone in my old farmhouse. I'd always found something charming about the creaky floors and the way the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. The house was built over 100 years ago, and every creak and groan seemed to tell a story. But that night, there was something different, something that I couldn't shake off. I was settled into my favorite armchair in the living room, sipping on a cup of tea and trying to unwind with a book. The only light came from a lamp in the corner, casting a soft, warm glow. The wind outside was picking up, making the house groan and shiver, but it was the kind of sound that usually soothed me. That night, however, the usual comforting noises seemed to take on a more unsettling quality. As I was reading, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or maybe the wind. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper came again. It was barely audible, like a distant murmur that didn't quite register. I paused, straining to hear better. The whisper was coming from the walls, or at least that's where it seemed to be coming from. The whisper was so soft that I couldn't make out any words. It felt like my imagination was playing tricks on me. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my mind wandering, but then I heard it again, a bit louder this time. I put down my book and focused on the sound. It was definitely a whisper, and it seemed to be calling my name. I got up from my chair and walked closer to the wall, pressing my ear against it, trying to understand what was being said. The whispering didn't become any clearer. In fact, it was still muddled and indistinct. It felt like the walls were speaking a language I didn't understand, or maybe the whispers were just too faint to comprehend. I could catch fragments of my name, but nothing more. My heart started to race. I tried to convince myself that it was just the house making those noises, maybe due to the shifting temperature or the wind. I even joked to myself that the house was just trying to be more talkative than usual. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew a bit louder, and the sound seemed to be coming from different directions. It felt like I was surrounded by whispers, with no clear source. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt a chill that made me shiver despite being wrapped in a blanket. The shadows on the walls, which had always seemed benign, now seemed to stretch and twist in the dim light. I glanced around, but everything was as it should be. Familiar furniture, the old rug, the framed pictures on the walls. Yet, the whispers persisted, creating an atmosphere that was anything but comforting. I felt a sense of dread growing. The whispers became more insistent, and it was like they were trying to convey something important or urgent. I wanted to block it out, to escape from the oppressive atmosphere, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I tried to focus on other things, like turning on the TV or listening to music, but nothing could drown out the whispers. They seemed to be everywhere, seeping into every corner of the room. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My pulse was racing, and I could hardly think straight. I felt like I had to get out of the living room. I needed a break from the unsettling sound. I forced myself to stand up, my legs feeling shaky and unsteady. I walked toward the stairs, the whispers fading slightly as I moved away from the living room. It was as if they were following me, lingering in the back of my mind even as they grew quieter. Climbing the stairs was a slow process. Every creak of the steps seemed louder than usual, and the house's groans felt amplified. When I reached the top, I made my way to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and turned on the light. The brightness felt reassuring, and the whispers finally stopped. The silence was almost as unsettling as the whispers had been, but at least it was a break from the relentless murmur. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to calm down. The night was dragging, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I turned on the TV for some noise, but it didn't help much. Couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept glancing at the door, half expecting the whispers to start again. The night felt endless. I kept the lights on, turning them all up high. I even checked under the bed and in the closet, just to reassure myself that nothing was hiding there. Despite my efforts to comfort myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It felt like the whispers were still there, just beyond the edge of my awareness. By morning, I was exhausted. I got up, determined to find a logical explanation for the night's events. I inspected the walls, checked the electrical wiring, and even looked in the attic and basement. Everything seemed normal. No hidden speakers, no loose wires, nothing out of the ordinary. It was like the whispers had come from nowhere, leaving no trace behind. The day passed, but the sense of unease remained. The house felt different, even though I knew that it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. I couldn't help but glance at the walls with suspicion, wondering if the whispers might start up again. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, made me wary. It was as if the night had changed my perception of the house. I've tried to rationalize the experience, but no matter how hard I try, I can't come up with a reasonable explanation. I wasn't under any particular stress, and nothing unusual was happening in my life. It was just an ordinary night, until the walls started whispering. I've heard other people talk about strange occurrences in their homes, but I always thought they were just exaggerating. I never thought I'd experience something like that myself. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was home alone in my apartment. The kind of day where the rain taps on the window like it's trying to get your attention. I had just finished cleaning up the place, and honestly, I was pretty proud of myself. I was about to settle down for a nap when something caught my eye. It was an old doll sitting on the shelf in the corner of my living room. I had seen it a million times before, but for some reason that day it felt different. I had never really paid much attention to the doll before. It was one of those creepy-looking dolls that you'd find in a thrift store, with a cracked porcelain face and frizzy hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in years. I always thought it was just a weird decoration that my aunt had given me when I moved in. But that day, something about it caught my eye. As I stared at it, I noticed that its eyes seemed to be following me around the room. I shook my head, thinking I was just being silly. It's just a doll, I told myself. But the longer I looked at it, the more I felt like it was watching me. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling. But no matter how hard I tried, the doll's eyes continued to move. It was as if it was alive, watching my every move. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the doll was somehow haunted. I mean, come on, who believes in haunted dolls? But there I was, sitting on my couch, feeling like I was in some horror movie. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. But the more I stared at it, the more uneasy I felt. I couldn't take my eyes off the doll. It seemed to be getting closer, or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I could feel its gaze burning into me, like it was trying to communicate something. I wanted to look away, to get up and do something else, but I was mesmerized by the sight of its moving eyes. It felt like I was in some kind of trance, and I couldn't break free. My heart started racing, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I was freaking myself out, but I just couldn't help it. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I had to do something about this creepy doll. I mustered all the courage I had and walked over to it. I felt like I was walking towards a monster. As I got closer, I could see the details on its face. The cracks, the faded paint, and the way its eyes seemed to glimmer in the dim light. It was like it was daring me to touch it. I grabbed a blanket from the couch, my hands shaking, and threw it over the doll. As soon as I did, the feeling of being watched disappeared. I sighed in relief, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the shelf where the doll sat, convinced that it was still watching me from under that blanket. I tried to distract myself by watching TV and scrolling through my phone, but every time I glanced at that corner of the room, I felt a shiver run down my spine. That night, I decided to go to bed early. I figured I'd just sleep it off and forget about the doll. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept hearing little creaks and pops from the living room, and I couldn't help but wonder if the doll was somehow moving under the blanket. I pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange noise. It was faint, but it sounded like someone was whispering. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it again. A soft, almost melodic whisper coming from the living room. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether I should get up and check it out or just hide under the covers. But my curiosity got the better of me. I quietly slipped out of bed and tiptoed towards the living room, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I got closer, the whispering grew louder, and I could make out a few words. It sounded like the doll was saying something, but I couldn't quite catch it. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached the doorway. I peeked around the corner, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The blanket that I had thrown over the doll was slowly sliding off, as if someone or something was trying to pull it away. I gasped and stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I felt paralyzed with fear, my mind racing with thoughts. Was this really happening? Was the doll actually alive? I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't deny what I was seeing either. In a moment of sheer panic, I turned and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it and pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. I could still hear the whispers, now mixed with soft giggles that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the dark room. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline, trying to convince myself that I was just dreaming. After what felt like an eternity, the whispers finally stopped. I slowly got up and peeked out of my bedroom door, still feeling shaky. The living room was dark and quiet. I took a deep breath and stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the doll on the shelf, the blanket now completely off, lying in a heap on the floor. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I approached it, half expecting it to jump out at me or something. But the doll was just sitting there, looking as innocent as ever. I picked up the blanket and threw it back over the doll, hoping that would somehow put an end to whatever was happening. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I felt like I was losing my mind. I spent the rest of the night in a state of hyper-awareness, jumping at every little sound. The next day, I decided I needed to get rid of the doll. I couldn't take the constant feeling of being watched anymore. I packed it up in a box, wrapped it in bubble wrap, and put it in the back of my closet, hoping that would be the end of it. But even after I did that, I still felt uneasy. It was like the doll had left a mark on me, a reminder of that creepy afternoon. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on with my life. I avoided the closet where I had stored the doll, but I still felt its presence lingering in the back of my mind. I would hear little noises at night, and I couldn't help but think it was the doll trying to get out. I even considered moving it to a storage unit, but I didn't want to deal with it at all. One night, I had a dream that the doll was sitting on my bed, staring at me with those creepy eyes. It felt so real that I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I bolted upright in bed, looking around my room, half expecting to see it sitting there. But of course, it was just a dream. I tried to shake it off and get back to sleep, but the feeling of dread lingered. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't keep living in fear of a doll. I went to a local thrift store and found an old wooden box. I put the doll in the box, locked it up tight, and left it in the store. I figured if I couldn't have it, someone else could deal with it. As I walked out, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But that relief didn't last long. A few days later, I got a call from the thrift store. They said someone had returned the box, claiming that the doll was moving in the store. I felt my stomach drop. How could that be? I thought I was done with it. I told them to get rid of it, but they insisted on keeping it. They said they had a special section for haunted items, and they thought it would be a great addition. Couldn't believe it. After that, I tried to forget about the doll and move on with my life. I went out with friends, started new hobbies, and tried to fill my time with distractions. But every now and then, I would hear stories about haunted dolls or see them in movies, and it would send a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was still out there, watching me from some dark corner of the thrift store. Months passed, and I thought I was finally free from the haunted doll. But one rainy afternoon, just like the one when it all started, I got a message from a friend. She sent me a picture of her new purchase, a creepy old doll she found at the thrift store. My heart sank as I stared at the picture. It was the same doll. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. How was this possible? I thought I had gotten rid of it for good. I texted her, trying to warn her about the doll's creepy history, but she just laughed it off. "It's just a doll. You're being ridiculous," she replied. I felt helpless, knowing that I couldn't convince her of the danger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, thinking about my friend and the doll. I felt like I had failed to protect her from whatever dark energy that doll carried. I finally decided to call her, hoping to convince her to get rid of it. But when I called, she didn't answer. I left a message, begging her to listen to me. The next day, I got a call from her. She sounded panicked. "You were right. The doll is moving. I swear it's watching me." My heart raced as I listened to her voice. I told her to get rid of it immediately, but she said she was too scared to even go near it. I felt a mix of fear and frustration. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I rushed over to her place, determined to help her. When I got there, I found her sitting on the couch, wide-eyed and trembling. The doll was sitting on the shelf, looking as innocent as ever, but I could feel the tension in the room. "Just cover it up," I said, trying to stay calm. She nodded and grabbed a blanket, throwing it over the doll. The moment she did, the atmosphere shifted. It felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. We both sighed in relief, but I knew this wasn't over. We decided to take the doll back to the thrift store together. I couldn't let it haunt us any longer. When we arrived, the store owner was surprised to see us. "You're back for it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I explained everything, and she agreed to take it back. We left the doll in the back room, and I felt a sense of closure wash over me. But even after that, I still felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I tried to move on with my life, but the memory of that creepy doll stayed with me. To this day, I can't explain what happened with that doll. I don't know if it was really haunted or if I just let my imagination run wild. But I do know that some things are better left alone. If you ever come across a creepy doll, my advice is to steer clear and keep your distance. Trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when you let your guard down.